Hi everyone, I'm Dan, Senior Security Consultant here at IT Partners, specialising in cybersecurity. Today we're going to talk about business email compromise. Business email compromise, or BEC, might not be a term you're familiar with, and it can be a bit hard to define depending on who you ask. For our discussion today, I'm going to use it as an umbrella term for various email-based social engineering scams that are used to target and defraud a business of email or data. Heavy emphasis on the target. So what's the difference between a phishing and a BEC campaign? Standard phishing campaign will focus on broader information theft through mass communication, sending out hundreds of thousands of emails at a time, hoping to get a small number of respondents. There's a greater degree of research that goes into the initial communications, and the whole attack tends to be more directed. Initial emails might only be sent to one person in a company, or 5 or 10, not hundreds or thousands. The ultimate goal is to steal information, steal money, or to get access to accounts that will let them do the same. BEC falls largely into 5 major types: CEO fraud, false invoice schemes, attorney impersonations, data theft, and account compromise. Multiple of these may be used in the same campaign. The initial vector might be an account compromise, and then once they're successful, they move on to a false invoice scheme. Ultimately, we're dealing with email-based social engineering attacks. There's often an element of trust that comes from a vendor that you typically deal with, or come from the CEO or another employee. They involve a financial element because the ultimate goal is getting paid. There's often an element of urgency, particularly in CEO fraud. We're in a meeting and we need you to organise some gift cards for our client in the next 30 minutes. There's often specific instructions about what to do, where to send things, and whether or not to follow up with someone. We're in a meeting, we're really busy, we can't take a phone call, please just get this done. They usually target a specific person. There's no point in asking someone for banking access who doesn't have access to the banking system, but the initial access may not be that specific person. Surprisingly, they don't usually contain malware. They don't want to do anything that will stop an email being delivered in the first place. So isn't this just phishing with more steps? Yeah, to be fair, it is. But phishing is a tactic or technique rather than a means to an end by itself. The general flow of the attack works like this. Typically, the attacker is going to pose as someone the recipient should trust, a colleague, an executive, or a vendor. They're going to ask the recipient to make a financial transaction of some kind, divert a payment, change a bank account detail for an upcoming invoice, buy a voucher or a gift card, send through the details. And finally, step 3, profit. They'll use open source intelligence techniques to gather information about who the admin staff are or who the financial staff are. They'll scrape things like corporate websites, they'll look at LinkedIn, they'll look at social media. They might use data brokers to get more company information. They may already have credentials from a dark web database captured in a previous attack. In short, they've gathered a list of valid targets for the attack. Depending on the BEC scam being used, the infrastructure setup might be as simple as spoofing a return address or changing a display name so the email looks like it comes from the CFO. They might set up a lookalike domain using a homograph attack. This is where character substitution is used to trick a user into thinking that a link or an email address belongs to their domain. Now I'd like to talk about a specific instance of a BEC, and that is email account takeovers. It may surprise you to know that an email account takeover is exactly what you expect. The ultimate goal of this BEC attack is to take control of and compromise a user account. This makes many of the subsequent attack types much easier to accomplish. The attacker doesn't need to pretend to be the finance person. If they're successful with an email takeover, essentially they are the finance person. With these type of attacks, we'll often see the attacker will exist in an environment for a long time, typically months or years. After the initial account compromise, they'll establish persistence. That is, maintain access to the email account, so even if the user changed their password, they're still able to get in. They will do things like set up their own MFA access or application passwords that allow them to stay logged in. And at this stage, they might go quiet to avoid triggering additional alerts. So with access to a user account, they've now got a foothold in the environment that they can use for lateral movement to get to an account with more privilege, or they're in a better position to get to their ultimate end goal, which is getting paid. The potential rewards from this kind of attack are typically much larger than from a standard phishing campaign. Let's work through a demo of an email account takeover. In this demo, the attacker sends a link from a lookalike domain targeting the finance admin at the victim company. They've spoofed the email alias of the CEO and included a link to a SharePoint file that needs to be looked at urgently. The SharePoint file is hosted in a legitimate Microsoft 365 tenancy, which the user happily logs into. Unfortunately, it's not the correct Microsoft 365 tenancy. The attacker has now captured the user's email login and password and grabbed the user's access token through an adversary in the middle attack, which allows them to bypass MFA. At this point, the attacker is now able to operate as the financial admin for this target company. The attacker can sit in the user's email account for months, looking for a large invoice to come in. They'll often set up rules to forward all emails that have the subject invoice to an external email or to another folder in a mailbox and mark them as read. They can then act on these emails to do things like change payment details or divert money to a different bank account. Business email compromise can be incredibly difficult to detect and protect against upfront. Because it's a social engineering attack, it relies more on human vulnerability than a technical vulnerability or exploit. As we've discussed, they tend to be very focused and targeted, so there's not a lot of mass telemetry to pick up. They often won't include malware or even links that enable them to get through email gateways. When there are links, they'll often point to legitimate services like Microsoft 365 or AWS tenancies. And they may have things like Cloudflare bot protection sitting in front of them to stop automated scanners and sandboxes from looking at the attachments. BECs require a multi-layered approach at the technical and the personal level to protect, detect, and respond to the threats. At the technical level, there are various technologies available to combat BEC. Secure email gateways are often able to detect spoofed domains or spoofed display names and will flag lookalike accounts or accounts with the same display name as an executive. Multi-factor authentication is a requirement. As we've seen in the demo, it is bypassable, so by itself, it's no longer enough. There are additional security-focused technologies available in the Microsoft 365 stack. With P1 and P2 licenses, you're able to look at things like risky user sign-ins. You can implement conditional access policies, in-tune device enrollment, and compliant device policies. There's some automated security controls for user password resets. The user logs in from a Mac in Germany using Firefox when they normally log in from a Windows PC in Auckland using Edge. Email authentication tools like DKIM and DMARC. They make it harder for threat actors to pretend to be part of your environment before they get an initial foothold. At the human level, there are many things that we can do. Using simulation tools, we can teach our users what to look out for phishing and social engineering-based attacks. This is looking out for things like strange email addresses or incorrect URLs or links. Slow down. Attackers will often target during extremely busy times of the year. Around holidays is a good time. Pause a second and think if a request makes sense. One of the simplest things you can do at a corporate level is have a policy for verification. If you get a request from a vendor asking for a bank account to be changed, give them a phone call. Have a policy of verification for any large-scale financial changes and never deviate from this policy. And encourage everyone to use valid channels when they're making purchase requests. Thank you for watching this video today. If you have any questions on business email compromise, please reach out to the team. If you like this video, please check out the other videos in the series, and we'll see you next time.